Good afternoon. I'm Desiree Dembski-Hamlin, Deputy Director of Freedom's Way National Heritage Area. On behalf of Freedom's Way, I'd like to welcome you to Introduction to Best Practices in Family Learning, the first session in our second webinar series, Creating Engaging Experiences for Families in a Digital World. First, I'd like to thank Freedom's Way board member, Susie Fonda, for organizing this series, and our guest, Jennifer Zanolli from the USS Constitution Museum. As many of you are aware, Freedom's Way National Heritage Area works with partners across 45 communities in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Our mission is to protect, promote, and enhance the natural, cultural, and historical resources of those communities. After the success of our first webinar series back in November, we decided to offer a second series to encourage the development of family programs for our annual Hidden Treasures program in May, which this year has been reimagined as the Hidden Treasures Festival of Nature, Culture, and History. We hope you'll consider partnering with us during this program. So a few housekeeping items. Please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. We will have questions and answers at the end of the presentation. But if something comes up along the way, please feel free to use the chat feature or the question and answer feature to send your questions in. And that is how we will facilitate questions at the end. Let's see. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our facilitator for today's session, Susie Fonda. Susie, as I mentioned, is a Freedom's Way board member and an educator with 15 years of experience in museums, including the Concord Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and the Plymouth Pawtuxet Museums, which was formerly known as Plymouth Plantation. Welcome, Susie.
Thanks, Desiree. And thanks to all of you for being here. We're so thrilled to have such a great turnout. I've been working in museum education for the last 15 years or so. But my expertise has been primarily on K-12 students. So when Desiree and Patrice first approached me about putting something together about family learning, the first website I went was to the USS Constitution Museum in Boston. And I can speak for myself, and I know a lot of my museum colleagues feel the same way, that the Constitution Museum is the place we have always looked to for their expertise in family learning going back 15 years or more. Over the years, just their research and their practical experience, they are really sort of the go-to people in Boston. So when I reached out to Jennifer she was able to make time in her busy schedule to be with us, I was absolutely thrilled, and I'm so glad that she's here to share her experience and answer your questions and hopefully get you very excited about doing something for families for Hidden Treasures and to work with this very important audience. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Susie. And thank you everyone for joining us today for this exciting topic, something that is near and dear to my heart. As Susie mentioned, my name is Jennifer Zanolli. My pronouns are she and her. And I have been working at the USS Constitution Museum as their Manager of Interpretation and Visitor Services for the past 10 years. And in addition to all my other responsibilities, I have been looking at family audiences as a primary focus throughout those 10 years. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with the USS Constitution Museum, we are located in Boston, Massachusetts, in the Charlestown Navy Yard. We are a private nonprofit that interprets an active duty Navy vessel, the USS Constitution, which is America's ship of state, as well as the oldest warship afloat in the world. Before the pandemic, we had about 330,000 visitors come through our bright red doors that you can see there every single year. And currently we are closed due to the pandemic. We were open temporarily during the summer and fall, but we closed down back again for safety reasons at the end of November. And since we closed down initially in March of 2020, we've really transitioned to doing most of our programming and interpretation of the ship online for families, students, and adults, which you'll see some examples here in this presentation, but I'm happy to talk more about in general, and you can find out more about our programming at usscm.org. But really, as kind of Susie mentioned, our entire philosophy at the museum has really been geared towards families. And it really has impacted everything that we do at the museum. And it has even made our way into our mission statement, which you can see here, as well as our vision statement for how we want to engage and interact with our visitors through an enjoyable educational experience where they can have fun and learn as they explore history together. Now, I've been talking a lot about family audiences, and this whole program is about family audiences, but I do feel like it's important to take a step and say, what exactly is a family audience? So when I say a family audience, I don't just mean, what you think of as a nuclear family. Really, when we use a family term, what we mean is any intergenerational audience. So that could be an adult with their child, or it could be a child with their grandparent. It could be an adult child with their adult parent. It could be nieces and nephews with their aunts. Really, a family audience is anyone that defines themselves as a family unit. And when we define families in that way, we actually find that we are already serving a large population of families in our institutions. So this is a graph by Wilkenings Consulting that showed back in 2018 that about half of American families had visited a museum either casually or regularly within the past year. So that is a huge audience. And normally when museums take a look at just their own individual audience, they find that families make up about 60 to 70% of their audience. So a big population of who's coming through your doors are probably a family audience. And that's actually what got the USS Constitution Museum interested in families, is we recognized that they were coming through the doors already. And we wanted to know, how could we best serve them? So we know that families are coming, but why are they coming and why are they interested in these cultural experiences? And we know from research that really families are looking for some family time together. They're looking for something that is fun, something that is educational, and something that their children can enjoy, but I would stretch it as far as that all ages can enjoy. So that's why parents are choosing cultural institutions like museums to spend their time and their dollars going to visit. And I think this quote over on my screen really kind of encapsulates what we think families are visiting and what their motivations are. So the quote is, "I love museums growing up, and I enjoy taking my children to them now. It's always a fun educational experience. It gives us time to unplug and spend time together as a family, creating memories while learning." I feel like that just kind of really sums everything up, right? It's educational, it's fun, it's spending time together, it's creating those memories while learning. All the things that from research we know that families are looking for in those experiences. So that's why families are visiting us. But I do want to take a moment to say, why would you as an organization want to think about really embracing a family audience? And one is it's probably going to expand your audience. As we saw in the previous two slides, about half of American families are visiting museums already. This is a huge population and a huge opportunity for museums to bring in an audience. And we find that family audiences that find a museum that really caters and specializes to their needs, they're more likely to come back to that organization in the future. It'll also help you build future museum visitors. So we know that adults that visited as a child to a museum, there's about 60%, let me clarify, about adults that have visited museums, about 60% of them visited museums as a child. And that's really important. So we know that going to a museum as a child indicates that people are more likely to come back as an adult. And what research has shown lately through an impact study through the blog post Know Your Own Bone is the way that visitors our children are coming to a museum is important. It showed that people that go to museums as children with their families are 1.73 times more likely to visit as an adult. They didn't find, unfortunately, that same correlation if people didn't visit as a child or if they visited in a school group. So that's why visiting in a family setting with your parents or with your grandparents or whoever you identify as a family when you're a child is so important for that future visitation. I also say that you get to see people laughing and learning together in your organization. One, I think that makes just for an enjoyable experience as an employee. I like to work in a place where people are having fun and enjoying themselves. But we also know that that's something that our audiences are looking for. They want to have a social, fun time. And by providing that, it's very possible that you might see an impact on your bottom line. Now, I can't guarantee it. I wish I could, but there is a pretty good indication that people that are laughing, that are spending more time with each other, that are enjoying your resources more, are going to help support your museum. I can tell you at the USS Constitution Museum, when we started embracing a family learning philosophy, our mission, which is based off of donations, we were getting about 43 cents per person. And then before we closed in 2020, after going through and doing lots of exhibits and programs that are really addressing this audience, our dollar per person donation rate is now at $2.46. So we've really kind of increased that amount of people giving us money through our mission. And I think it really, not solely has to do with this philosophy, but I think it definitely helps. And I hope it does to you. I do have a word of caution here at the bottom that it can be noisy, messy, and very rewarding. So something to think about as you're embracing this audience. So as you're looking at this audience and you're starting to think about planning a family program, these are the criterias that we decided at the USS Constitution Museum were important to us. So specifically, what we are looking for in a program that is addressing all ages or a family as a unit is that we want the program to have all ages actively participating in the experience together. We want everyone to feel like there is something for them. And we want intergenerational conversations to be taking place because we know that when people are having conversations, they're more likely to be learning and engaging with the material. So these were the three things that we decided were really important and that we were kind of aiming towards as we are designing programs. And it's still something that as I'm designing new programs that I look towards and try to think about as I am planning something. And the way that we get to these criterias, we found that there were different strategies that when we looked at really helped get us to what our end goal was. And those I'm going to share with you right now. So the first one is that it is a multi-user experience, which if you think about a family program and we're looking for all ages to actively participate together, you need it to be multi-user. That's kind of where you have to start. So we want people to be able to work together to form as a team to try to accomplish a task. We don't want kind of one person participating in the program and another person watching that person have fun. That's not really what we're looking for. So we're trying to get everybody to have an experience together. So the way that you can do that in your program is you can empathize teamwork. You can assign roles to people in the program for them to do. And you can make sure that the way that you're engaging with your audience is indicating that it's a program that's for multiple people. One of the things that we found was that it was really important for our facilitators to make sure to make eye contact with both the adult and the child within the first 30 seconds of a program for people to start to feel engaged and invited to participate. There's all of these kind of silent cues that maybe something is not really meant for all people, whether it's only having one pair of scissors in your craft kit or only having materials enough for one person to participate. So we always try to include multiple materials. For one example, I can give you I took our Alka-Seltzer Cannon program that we have here, and I made it into a take-home activity kit for this summer. And one of the things that I did was I made sure to include enough materials so that several people could make sure that they fired their Alka-Seltzer cannon successfully, as well as they each got a reward of a temporary tattoo. So just making sure that you kind of indicate that this is for multiple people. We also want to make sure that we're encouraging conversation. That's one of our goals in the end. So we want to build it into our program. And you can do this by asking open-ended questions and incorporating choice or challenges that encourage communal decision-making. So that's actually what you see in this picture here going on, is a program that we call Built to Win. It's where families have a limited amount of budget to purchase materials to build and design a tinfoil boat that can race down a water track at our museum. And when we started prototyping this program, we initially just gave out the same amount of materials in all of our kits. But what we found was by having the family have to make a choice of what materials they wanted, it naturally caused them to have that conversation that we were looking to do. So that's why having those choices and challenges and really making them work together to figure out a solution encouraged that conversation that we were looking for. And I do have a note on the bottom that says, be the guide on the side versus the sage on the stage. So that's just kind of one of our guiding philosophy for our presenters and our facilitators, is that we want them to be helping and guiding the experience for the family, but we don't want them to necessarily be center stage and be kind of, the prime focus. We want them to kind of share the stage and share kind of the content and the experience with the family. All right, our third criteria is that we want something to be relevant. This is something that I really pay attention to when I'm choosing a topic for my program. I want something that will connect to a family audience and to all different ages. So I really think about kind of universal experiences, whether that is sleeping or eating or working, having a family. What are those things that kind of bond us together that we can have conversations about? You can also be relevant by encouraging reflective questions, trying to think about the ways that you can kind of bring people's own experiences into the program by asking them to reflect and to think about their own experiences, and maybe share it or don't share it, but just kind of encouraging that process is something that's good to go through. And then also peopling the past, making a human experience that people can relate to, I think is important and helps make it something relevant that people can understand. One of my favorite programs that we do at the museum that I think is relevant in a way that I probably wouldn't initially think about is we have a temporary tattoo program where we sell temporary tattoos for $1 or $2 during the summer. And it's really relevant to families. I've done temporary tattoos on everyone from a 3-month-old to somebody that's 99. Everybody enjoys showing off and picking a tattoo. And I also think it's relevant and ends up starting these conversations with families that sometimes people didn't know, like, oh, did you know Grandpa had a sailor tattoo? Or let me tell you the history about why my tattoo looks the way it is. It's kind of a fun little universal. All right, so our next criteria is multimodal. I will admit that this is probably my favorite characteristic, and one of the things that I really enjoy doing when I'm brainstorming a topic is thinking about all the different ways that somebody in different ages could engage with a program. So I normally start thinking about different senses, different ways that people, learning styles, how people engage with the content. And I try to kind of integrate and brainstorm and think about all the different ways that people can engage with the topic. This picture here is from a virtual program that I ran back in October, which was for Halloween. It was called a Spooktacular Game Night. And it was a lot of fun, and it incorporated several different smaller activities that were meant to engage different types of learners and different types of people that, versus just kind of a standard trivia night. So we started by having a dance party. We did a scavenger hunt where people were looking for things that related to sailor superstitions in their home. We did some really gross trivia related to Constitution history. And then we also did a really close looking, trying to figure out what an object was. So different learning styles, different ways of approaching a topic. We really got the whole family working together and being engaged. And yes, I was dressed up as a captain for the program, which was fun. And that actually leads to my next one, which is a characteristic that I think is important, which is offering something that is authentic and distinctive for your organization. So families are really looking to museums for that authentic experience, something that is rooted in the real thing. And that is certainly something that us as museums or heritage sites can provide by incorporating real objects, materials, using quotes or authentic language, and then finding your own twist in something that's relevant to your site. So you have some pictures here of a Write with a Quill Pen activity that we have at the museum. And when we started prototyping this activity, it was really about kind of just the experience of writing with a quill pen, that kind of surprise and that awe of, wow, this is really difficult, and how did they do this? And, all the things that you get when somebody writes with a quill pen for the first time. And it was fun. Adults and kids really enjoyed it. But when we added our own distinct twist and made it a little bit more authentic to something that a sailor would have been filling out, like a seaman's protection certificate, it upped the engagement. It made people question, what is this document? What are we filling out? And it made them feel relevant and connected to the people in the past. And also, I know that that's kind of a material example, not something necessarily you can do in a digital program, but you can incorporate authentic experiences just by including a historic quote or by using authentic language. So for instance, I could switch from saying that USS Constitution is a ship, and I could go to USS Constitution is a frigate, which is just a type of ship, but it's something that is a little bit more distinct and authentic to the ship itself. And then of course, fun and play, right? That what families are looking for out of a museum experience is they're looking for something that is fun and playful and is in a social experience that really brings participants together. And we can do that as facilitators by creating a judgment-free zone, by respecting the effort that goes through participating in one of our wonderful family programs. And you can also incorporate fun and play by putting in competitions or games, or incorporating elements of surprise. Again, going back to our Alka-Seltzer cannons, even just the surprise of the cap kind of popping off and making that sound is enough to kind of bring people a smile to their face and an element of fun. All right, and then of course, accessibility. This is something that we are striving for in all of our programs. But as we are trying to engage a wide range of audiences and a wide range of ages, accessible experiences mean that everybody can participate. And so that's really about building in flexibility and choice into a program, as well as trying to use universally designed tools and provide materials for users of different ages or abilities. So in our picture here, you can see that we have the authentic cocking mallet that people would use on USS Constitution over to the right. But then we also made smaller cocking mallets for people that either are smaller themselves, like children, or that people just that it's harder to kind of lift the heavier caulking mallet. We also have adjustable tables at our site so that we can have people standing or sitting or in a wheelchair, and so that the facilitator has the flexibility to be able to accommodate those different needs. And then respect. I really think that all good communication and relationship building starts with respect. So that can go from showing gratitude when people are participating in your programs, recognizing the effort that it took to get to either to the museum or to participate in a virtual program during people's busy lives where there's a lot of competing competition for their time and energy. And then also you can show respect for your audience by recognizing the family's pre-existing relationships and their own dynamics. So not trying to kind of force your own agenda or the way that you want a family to interact or behave, but really just kind of recognize that this is where the family is at the moment, respect that, and kind of try to work with them instead of trying to get them to work in the exact way that you're looking for. So that's something that we try to train our facilitators at the USS Constitution Museum, build some empathy to try to get people to respect the family dynamic. So those are kind of our main resources and strategies. There are a couple of more that you can find at engagefamilies.org. There's also examples that you can find there, as well as kind of more content into those different strategies and examples. There's also, in addition to the website, there is a downloadable PDF booklet that has all of the design and characteristics in one book that you can look at.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I will encourage you, if you do have questions, to pop them into the chat. And I'm actually, while people are doing that, I'm going to pose a question of my own to you, which is that if I was somebody who was working at a site who was thinking about doing a family program this spring for Freedoms for Hidden Treasures, let's say, where would you suggest that they get started if they haven't done a lot with family programs? Where to begin?
Where to begin? I normally always think to start kind of in two ways, which I think are kind of the easy way to start, and the way that we started certainly at the museum. One, I think, is thinking about your current programming and ones that you've already seen that you think both could be relevant to all ages, both adults and children, or something that, like, say if you're doing a school program already and you always see that the adult chaperones seem really engaged, maybe that would make a really good all ages family program, and you might just take some reworking. The other thing that I would recommend is ask and look at your current family audience if you know where they are. Put a survey out on social media or to your mailing list. See what people are interested in, what content they find fascinating. Just also figuring out kind of the age range that you might be working with on a family audience, I think is really important. But those are kind of the two ways that I normally start thinking about programs. And then if I'm completely starting from scratch, don't have a family audience to really ask the questions to, or don't have a program that's reaching all ages, I start by thinking about what are those relevant topics that relate to kind of everybody. And then I start to think about all the different ways that people can engage with the topic. So that multimodal experience.
So we have a question from Ellen Cohen. What ideas for a safe alternative to hands-on activities in the pandemic?
Oh yeah, that is like the big question.
I know, the $64,000 question.
And it is something that we at the museum are trying to figure out ourselves, for some safe alternatives to hands-on activities. Some of the things that we have started to experiment with is kind of converting some of the things that you would normally operate with your hands to converting to operating with your feet. So for exhibits, we have kind of this cannon that you can learn the steps to firing, and normally you would slide the cannon to kind of go through the different steps, but instead you can make little feet pads that, you know, mimic the different steps that you do there. We've also transitioned just some of the things that you would normally kind of manipulate to being posters or things that people can gather around. It doesn't quite get exactly what we're looking for, but it is a way of still getting the content and to kind of get people having those conversations. But yeah, we are a little bit struggling with the hands-on component. But what I will say is that hands-on isn't just the only way to engage a family audience. I think that's where a lot of organizations kind of start thinking is, and obviously our museum is very engaging and hands-on, but there's so many different senses and ways that you can build competition and community that has nothing to do with hands-on. So even if you can't do hands-on safely right now, I still think that there's a lot of ways that you can engage a family audience.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple of other questions that have come in. This is from Victor. Any suggestions for engaging families where the adults, for cultural or economic reasons, didn't get to visit museums or cultural sites when they were kids?
Yeah. Was the question how to reach those audiences or how to engage them once they're
How to engage them, I'm guessing, but
yeah, I will actually admit that myself, I was somebody that didn't grow up going to museums. So I feel like I have a lot of empathy and understanding for those visitors that are coming to our sites without that kind of cultural understanding and awareness. What I will say you're right, it is generally the parents that are more hesitant to kind of get involved with family programs in general. They just are not quite sure exactly what they're supposed to be doing during the program, because oftentimes museum programs are, or things that are geared for families are actually really children's programs. So when you really do try to engage all of the adults, whether they're familiar with museums or not, I always feel like they need a little bit extra encouragement. So what I try to do with adults that maybe are a little bit more hesitant is one, making eye contact. That 30 seconds initial contact is really important. I also use a lot of words like together and team. And then it's really, I think, also about scaffolding the experience for the adult as well as the child. So one of the things that we do in our programs when we're on site is, we'll kind of verbally explain what a challenge is, but then in the kit that somebody's working on, if it's like an individual program, like the Built to Win, where you're building that tinfoil boat, we will reiterate what that challenge is on a little card that's in the kit. So if people are confused or not sure what they're supposed to be doing, they can refer to that. On that is also some prompting questions if people don't know where to start, like how long do you want to make your boat? How wide? So that basically you're kind of giving the parent some examples of what they can say to their child to get them to start engaging. I find that's really helpful. Also, as a facilitator, you can kind of look at what the family dynamic is and then go over and kind of mimic what you would think, what you want the parent involvement to be. So like, oh yeah, I see that you're kind of focusing on this. What I maybe would try to do is X. Or I also think just some encouragement when you see something going really well is helpful. Like, oh, I see you guys working really good as a team. Good job, keep that up. I think that really helps make people feel comfortable and confident in what they're doing.
Yeah, and and what about strategies? So Victor has followed up to say that he's interested in not just in engaging, but how bringing them to the museum. Are there any strategies you've used to bring to encourage people who didn't grow up with that experience to come to the museum?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I will admit that we haven't done anything specifically, but I will tell you what I have kind of strived to do, and I will completely admit that I am very lucky to work in an organization that is admission by donation. So financially and kind of time commitment wise, we're pretty low bar in terms of getting people through the threshold and starting to enjoy the experience. So I say that that's a benefit. So one is I personally share and talk about my museum all time. So whenever I'm out in the community or I'm picking up something at 7-Eleven just down the street, I am chatting people up about the museum. It's probably to the point where it's a little embarrassing, but I don't really care. So I think that is one way. As a museum, we also try to go to a lot of community events where we think that people that maybe are not familiar with our organization might be at. So for instance, there is a Touch a Truck Day that our community loves. I don't have a truck, I have a ship. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to be there. I'm always next to the fire engine, which is really flashy and cool. But we're there talking about the museum. We're there showing people how to make a paper officer's hat and, you know, just being where people might see us and kind of get some awareness of what we're doing.
Yeah, that's great. And another thing I would add from my experience kind of on this K-12 programming side of it is we always used to, when I was at the MFA, we had a partnership program with the Boston Public Schools, and we used to host a family night at the museum. So the kids would bring their families basically. And we would actually go to the schools, we'd get on the train with them, we'd ride the T, we'd come to the museum, walk in the front door with the parents and the kids who came every year, they knew the museum. And so they would show their parents around. So if there's ways you can make those connections, because, you know, parents might not necessarily bring their kids, but teachers often do. You know, and if there's ways to tap into that audience so that the kids lead their parents or their caregivers and their other family members. So
yeah, I love that. We have like a similar return pass that we give out to people that participate in our student programming, and it's inviting people to return with their families. But I love the fact that you actually go with them and bring them to the museum. That's really nice. I love that.
Yeah. What line do you get on the T and all of that was always a good. So we have a couple of other questions. So kind of somewhat related is I was wondering if you do anything or how you would engage with families where English is not the first language. Many families around us live in bilingual households, which may impact the intergenerational aspect of family programming.
Yeah, that is a great question. So something that I have found at our museum, and I will admit that this kind of goes back to that hands-on nature of things, is that because when you're using a lot of objects and hands-on things, the language divide often gets smaller. Not perfect elimination, but one of the things that I always tell my team is, for instance, we have this yard that people can climb up and lean over and furl a sail, I should say, and tie it up with a rope. And it's something that you don't actually need to describe with your verbal language. You can just kind of show people how it works and go from there. And by using kind of your excited face and kind of, you know, mimicking or showing people how that works. And I will say, you know, once kind of a family gets set up with a program, once you kind of show them kind of what you're looking for, or you demonstrate for them what you're looking for, that family dynamic and the family itself already knows kind of how to do the program and how to communicate with themselves. And that's actually what we're really trying to strive for in our programs. So once you're able to kind of get them set up, mostly they run as their own individual unit and they're able to communicate with themselves in a way that feels natural. And so that facilitated role is really just kind of getting them set up and then having the family, you know, work together. And so you really don't need all that much language, you know, shared language.
Yeah. And Roger points out too that sometimes children often speak English better than the parents. So oftentimes the learning goes both ways. The conversation goes both ways. We used to find that a lot with our K-12 audience when I worked at the MFA as well.
Yes, and I would agree. And then I think it's also just similar to when you talk to anyone kind of through an interpreter, it's still, even if the child is translating, making sure that you're still making eye contact with the adult
Hmm.
so that they, again,
Yeah.
still feel involved and still feel like you're communicating with them.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree. I do find that as well in our
Yeah.
programming.
Yeah. That's a great point. So I have a question from Jean. Here's a challenge for you. So we are a small all volunteer historical society with a small museum that's only open 2 hours on one day a month. We are
Okay.
limited by the number of volunteers we have, just a few, and due to the pandemic, we can accommodate only 5 people in the museum at one time. Have you any ideas for us to engage a family in a program at our museum?
Oh, okay. Um, all right. So you basically have limited operating hours, limited amount of staff or volunteers. Um, I guess where, again, my mind always goes to that multimodal experience. So, what are different ways that different ages can experience your site? What are some things that either you can get them like one thing that we do is like stand as tall as a mast, put out your arms like a yard. So like starting to incorporate those things that with your body that you can do safely in the house that kind of gets them working together. I could also imagine trying to do like I spy games. Like we're looking for something that is making light in this room or something that is, I'm trying to think about historic houses that I've worked in, so I'm trying to think about some of those universal things, something that would create warmth, whether it's like a blanket or a fireplace, or and you can kind of start to have some of those conversations. You can also have people, give them a challenge, to try to find all of those things and then report back to you so that they're working as a team. Yeah, so that's where my mind naturally goes to, is kind of, you only have one staff member that's maybe facilitating or setting up the experience, and then figuring out what the family can do safely in the home that incorporates kind of their senses or different types of learning that can maybe pull in different people to work together. That's where my mind goes. It's
Yeah.
not really fleshed
Yeah,
out.
and the one thing I thought about too is, thinking about how having a limited number of volunteers, but also wanting to engage families. I wonder about the idea of family volunteers. Of perhaps in your community, would you want to set something up where oftentimes kids do have to do service projects, or is there a way to tap into that, to get families involved in the museum in that way? So that's one possibility. But
I love that.
yeah. So here's another question for you. So from Ellen, do you offer activities that the kids have something to take home with them, and how important is that?
Great question. So yes, we do offer, when we're doing programming in the museum, activities or things that people can take home. So for instance, going back to our tinfoil boat um, competition where they have to build it and race it, we give them a certificate at the end that has their ship name, and it's signed by the designer of USS Constitution, Joshua Humphreys, so that it's something that like you can pin up on your fridge. But then on the back of it is some resources, like some books or games that people can play online related to what they did. And we felt like that was really kind of important to extend that learning and to kind of invite people to continue to experience things. So I always think that's really important. I also find it's not necessarily a take home, but it's more of a like, what do we do now that the program's done? And so in our museum, it might be, I always think of it like, what is that release at the end? And we always try to think of it as like an extension of the learning possibilities. And so, like, all right, you just built your tinfoil boat here. Well, if you go down the hall, you'll be able to design your own boat and battle it against each other in this little video game that we have. Or if you go upstairs, you can practice furling that sail together so that you're kind of pointing them towards directions for things that they can do after the program. But I guess, yes, we try to include some activities that they can take home and enjoy later. We have lots of resources on our website as well that link to activities that are in our museum. And then we also try to show them things that they can do in the museum that relates to what they just did.
Great. Yeah, and if you come back, not to do an ad for next week's program, but our next week's webinar, some of our other colleagues from museums in the heritage area will be joining us to show some of the things that they've done, some of the activities that they've had on offer for parents and for families to use. So you'll see some other examples of that. So I guess maybe I'll ask one final question, which is, I guess, what is the best part about working with families for you?
I mean, it's just working with the families, right? I love working with families. I get to see and kind of witness some really just wonderful moments of people kind of understanding each other a little bit more by being in our museum. I remember there was a gentleman that had served in the Army, and he came down and he shared with me, he's like, this is the first time that I think my son actually understood what my service was like and why that was important. That was an interaction that happened because of our museum and the way that our museum is set up and meant to engage all ages. I think that's great. We get drawings from kids that come back to the museum, and their parents said, like, oh, we were coming to the museum, and they say, we gotta stop. Like, one person had their parents stop and they had to draw a picture for us, and they gave it to us at the front desk, and it was adorable. That's just personally rewarding. I think it's working with the families. It's so exciting. You get to see and hear people laugh. I've had social workers tell me that they bring people to our museum because it makes it easy for families to have conversations. And that's something that they can have fun and do together. And so she often brought families that were not together always to our museum. And that was really rewarding to hear. So yeah, things like that. I think just working with the families.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, thank you. I want to thank you so much for doing this and for sharing all of your wisdom. Is there a best way to get in touch with you if people have questions or want to learn more?
Yes. Yeah, please do. I will put my email in the chat. So it's jzanolli@usscm.org. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk about family learning and family engagement. Clearly, it's something that I'm passionate about and love talking about and could talk about forever. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, it absolutely shows. So we're so thrilled to have you join us today. It's been a great conversation, and it's just sort of the beginning of the conversation, if you will. So we will be back here again next Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Where you'll get to hear from some of our colleagues that are in the heritage area, from the Concord Museum, from the Fitchburg Art Museum, and from the Discovery Museum. So we have a nice selection of the nature, culture, and history aspects of Freedom's Way. So I'm going to turn it back to Desiree with some final remarks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Susie. This was fabulous, and we are looking forward to next week. One quick thing to note is that Freedom's Way actually just announced its third cycle of our partnership grant program. And so I'll include that link in the chat, as well as those of you perhaps trying to plan a family program may be able to utilize that program, our grant program. So again, thank you both, and thank you to our attendees. It's great to see, again, so many new names, new organizations, as well as our tried and true partners. We know you're all doing great work throughout the heritage area, and we can't wait to see what you've got planned for May. So with that, have a great afternoon and hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.